Okay, so today we're going to talk about cascading behavior in networks. Since this is our penultimate presentation for this course, so just a single one more on the small world phenomenon. So we'll start out by talking about diffusion networks, and individual choices that we make often depend on what others do. You know, we can kind of think about our social networks in two different ways. The network is an aggregate, that's everybody inside of it, or individuals and our neighbors who exert influence on us. A lot of these interactions happen at the local level compared to the global level. In particular, I'm probably more concerned, with what my neighbors and the people I work with think than what I am in terms of, like the global audience. So for example, in terms of choosing a programming language, probably more keen to select something that my colleagues are using, or, the one that's being used for the current project in order to write something. That's why I often times go with C++ because it's kind of a common language here at UH-Hilo. We also in the past looked at the strong and weak ties, but we didn't go into decision making based on these neighbors. Just noted that there were strong ties and weak ties between people in positive and negative relationships. We also looked at informational and direct benefit effects. And what we're going to do is connect these approaches by exploring some of the decision-making principles that can be used to model individual decision-making in a social network that lead people to align their behaviors with those of their network neighbors. So diffusion of innovations is in an area of empirical work that is experimental work or actual observational work in sociology, known for studying the spread of a new technology or idea through a group of people and analyzing the factors that facilitated or impeded its progress. So examples can be the adoption of hybrid corn varieties in Iowa that is mentioned in the chapter, or adoption of tetracycline by physicians. And basically, these are facilitated by early adopters who spread the idea throughout the network. These early adopters tend to have higher socioeconomic status and engage in more travel than the later adopters. So innovations can fail or succeed. Pictured here is Google Glass, which is something that definitely failed. It can be due to the complexity of it. Hey, it's too difficult to work this new thing, and I've got something that does the same job. Then I won't adopt the new innovation. Can I observe people using it? If I can't observe people using it, I may not choose to adopt it. Ability to try the product. If I'm able to try and say, hey, there's a benefit to this, then it may lead to me adopting it. And Google Glass probably goes into that compatibility with the social system it was entering. Basically, they gave it to a lot of people who used it in highly social contexts, and it ended up not going over very well. And oddly enough, homophily, basically our desire to be like our neighbors can be a barrier to entry for new technology or an idea. Particularly if our neighbors are using something different than the new entrant. So we'll focus on the individual model, and we're going to talk about direct benefit effects. Basically, they involve the underlying consideration of you have certain neighbors. These are your friends, acquaintances, or colleagues in the social network, and the benefits to you for adopting a new behavior increases more and more of these neighbors join in. If all my colleagues in the computer science department are writing in C++, it certainly benefits me to adopt C++ rather than, say, Java. In such case, simple self-interest will dictate that you should adopt the new behavior once a sufficient proportion of your neighbors do so. So we can consider these ideas as a game theory game. There are two choices here, A or B. If V and W are linked by an edge in a social network, that is their neighbors, then there's an incentive to have matching behaviors, a bit like our exam presentation game that we talked about earlier. If V and W both adopt A, then they receive a payoff of A, which is greater than 0. If they both adopt B, they receive a payoff B, which is greater than 0. And if they adopt opposite technologies, one adopts A and one adopts B, then they don't get anything. So the important thing here is that each node is playing this game with all its neighbors. So, what should I do as B to try to maximize my payoff? Well, it depends on the payoffs for A, B, and the number of neighbors I have. So say a fraction of neighbors use A, and that'll be P as a fraction, and 1 minus P will use B. A is the better choice for me if P is greater than or B divided by A plus B, and we can rename that value Q, and that's a threshold. And in case of a tie, we'll say that we choose A. So there are two obvious equilibria in this game. Either everybody adopts A or everybody adopts B. We want to know how easy it is to tip the network one way or another. So suppose everybody starts out with technology B. We introduce A, which is improved version. How far is A going to spread within the network? Well, we need a model for this. So suppose the coordination game is set up so that A is 3 and B is 2. That is, A is 1/2 times as good as B. Using the threshold formula, we see that the nodes will switch from B to A if at least the number Q, this is our threshold, is equal to 2 divided by 3 plus 2, or 2/5 fraction of their neighbors are using A. So suppose V and W are the initial adopters. Well, R, 2/3 of its neighbors are using A, so R is going to go over. And T, 2/3 of its neighbors, B and W, are using A, so T is going to flip over. Now we look at the next round. S, at least 2/3. In fact, 2/3 are using it, so that's better than 2/5, so it's going to go. And same with U. And everybody ends up adopting it. We get a complete cascade in this case. Here's an example where it stops. We don't get that complete cascade. So this one, we start out with 7 and 8, and we, from there spread to 5 will definitely pick it up, and 10 will definitely pick it up. From there, 9 and 4 will pick it up, and then 6 will pick it up. But that community of 1, 2, and 3 is closed off, and the community down in the lower right is closed off, as basically prevents a dense community that prevents the adoption of the new technology. So we're left with 2 communities that are using B, and 1 community, the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that are actually using A. So here's an example where it does come to a halt, and that's one of the 2 possibilities. You get the complete cascade, or you get a halt. Complete cascades can be a bit of a rarity. Real life areas where you don't get complete cascades, obviously politics. It's rare that everybody's going to go one way or another, except in countries where the leader will get 100% of the votes, but I don't think you can trust those elections. Technology, even to a certain extent, there was the old Mac versus PC ads. Not everybody adopted PC, even though it was the stronger, or not, I wouldn't say stronger, was the more dominant or more common platform. Same with Linux versus Windows, Python versus C++. You very rarely get these complete cascades in technology. Social network platforms, not everybody is on Facebook, or Meta, I guess it's called. Not everybody's on Twitter. One way to get increased adoption is to increase the quality of the product. The other way is to convince a small number on the other side of the switch, particularly ones that are in positions of influence. Cascades can stall when they try to break into these densely connected communities, and we say the cluster of density P is a set of nodes such that each node in the set has at least a P fraction of its neighbors in the set. So in this figure, we can see 3 communities with density 2/3. Now, some limitations apply, and the authors say, as with any formal definition, it's important to notice the ways in which it captures our motivation, as well as some of the ways in which it might not. Each node in a cluster does have a prescribed fraction of its friends residing in the cluster as well, implying some level of internal cohesion. On the other hand, it does not imply that 2 particular nodes in the same cluster necessarily have much in common. For example, in any network, the set of all nodes is always cluster of density 1. After all, by definition, all your network neighbors reside in the network. Also, if you have 2 clusters of density P, then the union of these 2 clusters is also a cluster of density P. So there are some limitations to that. In this one, there are actually 2 communities of density 2/3, obviously the one with 1, 2, and 3, and the one with 11 through 17 down at the bottom. And in that example, A could not break into those communities. So clusters are obstacles to Cascade. In fact, they're the only obstacles to Cascades. So formally, we can consider a set of initial adopters of behavior A with a threshold of Q for nodes in the remaining network to adopt behavior A. If the remaining network contains a cluster of density greater than 1 minus Q, the initial set of adopters will not cause a complete cascade. That is, clusters are an obstacle to cascades. Moreover, whenever a set of initial adopters does not cause a complete cascade with threshold Q, the remaining network must contain a cluster of density greater than 1 minus Q. And this one says that, hey, the clusters are the only obstacle. So, the punchline is the initial set of adopters can cause a complete cascade at threshold Q if and only if the network contains no cluster of density greater than 1 minus Q. So in some sense, cascading clusters truly are natural opposites. Clusters block the spread of cascades, and whenever cascades comes to a stop, there's got to be a cluster out there that can be used to explain that. So there's a difference between learning about something and adopting it. People learned about Google Glass, but they didn't quite adopt it. You can become aware of this new technology, but never go with it. And we saw how weak ties can connect disparate parts of a network. Those bridges that allowed us to get jobs way back at the beginning of the course. The bridges definitely carry awareness, but they tend not to be very good at transmitting behaviors. Now, small things such as jokes or memes can go through a network, large network quite easily over bridges, but behavioral changes such as social movements or, political change tend to build slowly and locally. So we do a little bit of an extension on our model here. And so far, everybody has had the same payoff and the same intensity of interaction with their network neighbors. What if they had different payoffs for their adoption decision? We can model that here. And in fact, we can have a personal threshold that's related to the payoffs for that particular node, in this case, V. So P is greater than B sub V divided by A sub V plus B sub C, and we could call that Q sub V. Let's see an example of how this works. Here, 1 is in a pretty central location, but they're not necessarily going to be a strong influencer on others. Now, 3 with a 0.1 threshold is pretty easily influenced. Hey, 3 will try anything new. He's kind of like Mikey from Life Cereal. And basically after 3 adopts it, well, he spreads the idea to 2 and 5. And then after 2 and 5 get it, 4 and 6 join in. But the idea can't spread any further than that, because you need to break into that cluster over there with 7, 8, 9, and 10, and there's just not enough to break into that. So that cluster basically forms a blocking cluster and stops the complete cascade. So we'll talk a little bit about knowledge thresholds and collective action, and consider a situation where coordination across a large segment of the population is important. The underlying social network is serving to transmit information about people's willingness to participate. In fact, the Quiet Before, the book that we talked about at the beginning, they talk about the Arab Spring, which were uprisings against authoritarian regimes and unpopular ideas. This is a bit like the Alfaro Bar problem. If enough people show up kind of in reverse. If not enough people show up, then the protests will be ignored, or even worse, you get rounded up and arrested, or labeled as an agitator and an authoritarian regime. Probably not a good thing. But if enough people show up, then there's a good possibility of change. So you want to know if enough people are going to show up. There's a problem, though, which is pluralistic ignorance. And basically, that means you don't know what everyone's going to do. You only know about your neighbors. And the book gives an example of a survey conducted in the US way back in 1970. That'd be 52 years ago. But it's been replicated with similar results over time. And it showed that while only a minority of Americans personally favored racial segregation, significantly more than 50% believed that it was favored by the majority. So, it was pluralistic ignorance. We weren't sure or aren't sure what the vast majority of the population believes. And, that still rears its head to this day in politics. So everyone's going to have a personal threshold at which they'll participate. Mine's probably quite high before I'm going to go out into the streets. There are some people who will always be out in the streets. So, assume you also know the thresholds of your neighbors. So, I know my neighbor to the left and right, at which point they're going to go out there and protest. So they actually have a smaller example with 4 vice presidents, and the president of the company makes an unpopular decision that the 4 vice presidents aren't really happy with. They definitely want a critical mass in order to confront the president or the CEO. If they're the only person, then they're going to face the wrath of the CEO alone. So here, U needs 2 neighbors to join in, but knows that W needs 4, and W doesn't have 4. So, it doesn't even have 4 neighbors. So there's no way W is going to do anything. V needs 2, U knows that V needs 3, and he only has 1. And so, because W is not going to join. So W is not going to rise up, so there's going to be no uprising against the CEO in this case. And the same in this one. This one is a little bit different because U knows V needs 3. W knows that X needs 3, but and V also knows that X needs 3, but U doesn't know anything about X, doesn't know what X is going to do because they're not connected. Same with V and W. They don't know what each other is going to do. So there won't be an uprising in this case. This one, an uprising can occur because U, V, and W know that if they act in concert, each one of them has a threshold of 3, they'll join in. X probably won't because X isn't connected, but there's a large enough threshold that U, V, and W are going to have an uprising against the CEO. And, a lot of these decisions come down to who knows what. In protest movements, social institutions such as newspapers can transmit information. That's again something that's brought up in Beckerman's book, The Quiet Before. You can also transmit information via television or other media commercials. Apple's 1984 Super Bowl commercial let folks know that a lot of people out there were using Apple computers, and it's a very famous commercial. It's got some strong 80s vibes there, obviously, but it was voted as one of the most influential commercials of all time. And, of course, central coordination can also help. If you have something like a union that coordinates movements of the members, that can certainly help other people to know what's going on. Final idea in the chapter is that of cascade capacity, and this is the largest threshold at which any small set of initial adopters can cause a complete cascade. To get this, we look at infinite networks where each node has a finite number of neighbors. So, in this small example here down at the bottom, we could assume this extends out infinitely both left and right. Here you need 1/2 to get a complete cascade. There's a grid example on page 589 that turns out to be 3/8, but the upper bound for cascade capacity is 1/2. And when Q is greater than 1/2, there's no finite set of nodes that can cause a complete cascade. So that's it, and we'll have chapter 20 up here pretty shortly. So thanks so much for watching.